Picture this. You are sitting in a front office somewhere in Cleveland, Ohio. You have spent weeks carefully managing the language around your quarterback competition. Every press conference answer has been calibrated. Every public statement has been deliberately vague enough to preserve your options while sounding sufficiently decisive to keep the media cycle moving in a direction you can live with. You have built a system of diplomatic ambiguity around this situation, and it has been holding together reasonably well. And then Myles Garrett opens his mouth, not through a leak, not through a carefully worded statement filtered through his representation, directly, specifically, with the full force of everything he has built and earned in that city standing behind every single word. And just like that, your carefully constructed wall of organizational language has a crack running straight through the middle of it that no press conference on earth is going to seal back up. That is the moment Cleveland is living through right now. And I want to talk about it with the seriousness it actually deserves, because I think a significant portion of the conversation around this story has been treating it as drama when what it actually is clarity. Hard, uncomfortable, organizationally inconvenient clarity delivered by the one person in that building whose opinion carries enough weight to make everyone else in the room pay attention, whether they want to or not. Let me start by telling you exactly who Myles Garrett is in the context of this franchise, because understanding the source of these comments is everything. This is not a player who manufactures controversy for relevance. This is not someone who wakes up calculating how to insert himself into a narrative that has nothing directly to do with his position on the field. Garrett has spent years in Cleveland doing one thing above everything else, and that thing is showing up. Sunday after Sunday, season after season, regardless of what was happening at quarterback or in the front office or in the public narrative surrounding the franchise, he has faced quarterbacks on the other side of the ball who were healthy, prepared, and surrounded by weapons, and he has made their lives genuinely miserable with a consistency that borders on supernatural. He has done that while watching his own franchise cycle through quarterbacks with the kind of relentless, exhausting frequency that would have driven most elite players toward a trade request years ago. He never went there. He stayed. He competed. He gave everything his body and his will could produce for a city that has not always made it easy to love this football team. That is who is speaking right now. And when someone with that profile decides that the moment for diplomatic silence has passed, you do not treat it as noise. You sit down, you close your mouth, and you genuinely listen to what is being said. What Garrett said is not vague. It is not the kind of thing that can be softened into something organizationally convenient with a little creative reinterpretation. He wants Shedeur Sanders named the starting quarterback, not at some unspecified future point when the competition has run its natural course and the coaches have weighed their options with appropriate deliberation. Now, QB1, the full organizational commitment locked in and made public before this team takes another meaningful step toward the 2026 season. He is not requesting a leaning. He is not asking for a signal. He is asking for a declaration, the kind of clear, unambiguous commitment that a young franchise quarterback needs to operate from a position of genuine psychological security, rather than the particular weight of a competition where the finish line keeps moving, based on factors that may have nothing to do with who is actually performing better on the football field. And coming from Garrett specifically, that request carries a dimension that no organizational statement or coaching staff endorsement can replicate. When the most respected player in a locker room puts his name and his credibility directly behind a young quarterback in front of the entire football world, it changes the atmosphere of that building in ways that are real and lasting and not reversible through a carefully worded response. Every player in that facility now knows where the most important voice in the room stands. They know what Garrett's credibility is built on. They know how many years of unconditional sacrifice and consistent excellence sit behind every position he stakes out publicly, and they are going to orient themselves around that voice in ways that the front office cannot control through press conference management. That is just how locker rooms work. The most respected player sets a gravitational field, and everyone else moves within it. But Garrett does not stop at naming Shedeur. And this is where the conversation gets genuinely uncomfortable for some people in Cleveland. And I think it deserves to be engaged with honestly rather than softened into something less than what it actually is. He reportedly wants Dillon Gabriel traded, not managed through the remainder of the competition, not retained as developmental depth or a veteran safety valve, moved out of the building, placed somewhere else where he can start fresh without the accumulated weight of everything that has transpired in Cleveland between his arrival and this moment. I want to spend real time here because the instinctive reaction for a lot of people is to hear that and immediately frame it as harsh or even unnecessarily personal. It is neither of those things when you understand what Garrett is actually reading. Gabriel has been visibly frustrated inside this competition. Reports describing a player who feels disrespected and undervalued have been building for weeks with enough consistency and specificity that you cannot dismiss them as manufactured narrative. And here is the thing about frustration of that kind inside a quarterback room. It does not stay contained to the player experiencing it. It radiates. It changes the energy of every shared space those players occupy. It creates a background tension that someone has to manage constantly, which means that organizational energy and coaching attention that should be directed toward building something is instead being spent on maintaining a peace that nobody fully believes in. Garrett is not asking for Gabriel to be discarded without regard for his professional situation. He is identifying a genuine organizational cost that the continued presence of that unresolved tension is producing and saying that Cleveland does not need to carry that cost into what should be a moment of clarity and forward momentum. Give Gabriel a fresh start somewhere that is actually right for him. Let this building direct its full energy toward the thing it is actually trying to build. That is not cruelty. That is the kind of difficult organizational honesty that winning franchises find the courage to act on when the competitive stakes are real. Then there is the Deshaun Watson dimension of this conversation, and I genuinely think this is the most intellectually interesting element of what Garrett is describing if you are willing to think it through carefully rather than reacting to the surface level headline. Garrett is not advocating for Watson to be dramatically pushed out or publicly humiliated. His reported thinking is that Watson slides into the backup role behind Shedeur and functions in a genuine supporting capacity. And before you react to that, I want you to sit with what it actually implies, because there is real football intelligence embedded in this construction. Watson, at this particular point in his career, and given the full weight of everything that has happened over the last several years, is not the answer at the starting position in this league. That conversation is effectively over, and I do not think very many serious football people are having it anymore. But what Watson still carries, and what most backup quarterbacks across this entire league simply do not possess, is the lived experience of having operated at an elite level inside complex NFL offenses during his genuine competitive prime. He has read defensive schemes that most backup quarterbacks have never encountered at the highest level of the game. He has processed the full cognitive chaos of an NFL regular season from inside the pocket, with real franchise consequences attached to every decision he made. He has been the player that opposing offensive and defensive coordinators simultaneously constructed their game plans around, which means he understands the burden and the responsibility of that position in a way that cannot be taught through film study alone. That accumulated knowledge and that specific kind of football intelligence does not evaporate because a player's physical prime has passed. What Garrett seems to be proposing is a deliberate redeployment of that intelligence. Stop managing Watson as a starter, attempting to reclaim relevance. Start using him as the most experienced mentor a developing franchise quarterback could possibly have standing immediately behind him. That is not a consolation role constructed to manage Watson's feelings. That is a genuine competitive advantage for Shedeur's development, and it is the kind of creative organizational thinking that you only arrive at if you are looking at the quarterback room as a developmental ecosystem rather than a simple depth chart hierarchy. The honest complication in all of this, and I think it deserves to be named directly, is whether Watson's psychological makeup allows him to genuinely inhabit that role, or whether the resistance to it creates its own quiet organizational problem over time. That is not a character judgment. That is a realistic human assessment of what it asks of any person who operated at Watson's level to consciously redirect their entire professional purpose toward supporting someone else's growth. Some players navigate that transition with genuine grace, and the organization becomes richer for it in ways that show up in unexpected places. Others resist it in the small, difficult to articulate ways that eventually become visible in the details, in film room body language, in how a player responds when competitive pressure reveals everyone's true orientation. How Watson manages that interior psychological territory is going to be one of the most quietly consequential storylines of this entire season, regardless of how much public attention it receives. Now, I want to walk you through the football logic that sits underneath all of this, because I think the natural tendency when Garrett's name is attached to a story is to center the drama and lose track of the strategic coherence in what he is actually describing. He is not reacting emotionally, he is reading the organizational evidence in front of him and drawing reasonable, defensible conclusions from that evidence. Consider what Cleveland actually did in the 2026 draft class. They invested meaningful capital in offensive linemen. Not a single token pick in a comfortable middle round. A deliberate, prioritized commitment to building protection for whoever is going to be taking snaps for this offense on a sustained basis. You do not make that kind of investment around a player you are still treating as one option in an ongoing competition. You build that kind of infrastructure around a player you have already internally decided is your future, because you are constructing a physical wall specifically designed to give that player the time and the safety he needs to develop without being physically and psychologically damaged before his ceiling can be reached. Garrett sees those draft investments for exactly what they represent, and I think he is right to see them that way. They are a signal. An organizational commitment communicated through resource allocation, rather than press conference language, which is actually the more honest form of organizational communication, because resource allocation costs something real, and press conference language costs nothing. His public comments are, in significant part, his way of saying that what the organization is communicating through its actions and what it is communicating through its words need to align with each other. You drafted protection for Shedeur. You built the wall around him. Now finish the sentence. Name him. Give him the psychological clarity that a young quarterback at this level needs to operate from genuine confidence, rather than the specific mental weight of a competition that might resolve itself based on factors beyond his control. This matters more than it might seem when people discuss quarterback development abstractly. There is a real and documented relationship between consistent pocket time and the speed of a quarterback's cognitive development that goes beyond the obvious surface logic. When a passer has genuine, reliable time to operate, the game begins to reorganize itself at a neurological level over the course of a season. His processing accelerates because his physical situation is not consuming mental bandwidth that should be allocated entirely toward reading the defense in front of him. His eyes get cleaner and faster because he is not anticipating pressure that has not arrived yet. His decision-making sharpens because the time the playbook assumes when those concepts were drawn up is actually available to him in real competitive situations. Putting a talented young quarterback into a situation where the protection is consistently inadequate does not make him tougher or more resilient in the ways that matter. It distorts the specific cognitive development that separates good quarterbacks from great ones, and those distortions can take years to fully unwind. Cleveland just made a loud draft statement about refusing to let that happen to Shedeur Sanders. Myles Garrett is pointing at that statement and asking the organization to honor it completely, rather than partially. The locker room reality of what Garrett just did is something I keep coming back to, because I genuinely believe it does not receive the serious analytical attention it deserves in most of the coverage surrounding this story. When a player of Garrett's standing goes public with something this specific and this direct, it does not exist in an organizational vacuum sealed off from everyone else in the building. Every player on that roster is going to know about it within hours if they did not already. They are all going to process what it means that the person they respect most in that facility chose this particular moment to stop being diplomatically careful and start being genuinely honest. Some of them were privately leaning toward Shedeur already. Some of them were watching the competition with real uncertainty about where it was heading. And now the most credible voice in the entire organization has said publicly what a significant portion of that locker room was probably thinking privately. And that kind of collective alignment, once it begins to crystallize around a specific position and a specific player, becomes extraordinarily difficult to reverse without paying a real organizational price, which is precisely the position the Cleveland front office now occupies, and I want to be honest about just how uncomfortable that position actually is if you think it through. You cannot absorb a statement this specific from a player this central to everything your franchise is trying to accomplish and simply issue a diplomatic non-response and expect the situation to return to neutral. You either respond with action that validates what Garrett said and demonstrates that this organization trusts the judgment of its most important player enough to act on it when the moment demands it, or you respond by going in a different direction and accepting every relational and cultural consequence that comes with publicly overruling the player whose presence alone makes Cleveland genuinely competitive in games where everything else breaks down. That second path is not logistically impossible. Organizations override player preferences all the time, and occasionally for very good reasons that the player himself eventually comes to understand. But Garrett is not any player offering an opinion that can be respectfully acknowledged and then quietly set aside. He is the cornerstone that opposing offensive coordinators build their entire game planning process around. He is the one consistent competitive reality in a franchise that has had precious few of them for a very long time. Damage that relationship through an organizational decision that signals his investment and his credibility are not considered sufficient to earn a genuine hearing when the stakes are real. And you are not just making a quarterback decision. You are making a statement about the entire culture of that building and about what kind of organization Cleveland intends to be going forward. Shedeur Sanders, throughout all of this, this, has been doing the only thing within his direct control: working. Reports from inside that facility describe a player who has treated this entire offseason as the most serious professional undertaking of his life. Someone who is rebuilding himself physically and mentally every single day, with the kind of quiet, self-sustaining urgency that does not require external validation or organizational confirmation to keep going. He is not waiting for an official announcement before he treats the opportunity as real. He is operating as though the moment has already arrived and using every available hour to be more prepared for it tomorrow than he was today. That is not a small thing about a young quarterback's character. That is the specific quality that separates players who become what their talent suggests they can be, from players who have the same talent but lose themselves in the noise of the external situation surrounding them. Everything in this situation is pointing in the same direction simultaneously. The draft class Cleveland assembled points toward Shedeur. The most respected voice in the building points toward Shedeur. The young quarterback's own daily conduct points toward the kind of player who deserves the investment being made around him. The organizational behavior, expressed through how resources have been allocated and where protection has been built, points toward Shedeur. At some point, the front office has to decide whether it is going to let its actions and its words exist in the same sentence, or whether it is going to continue managing the distance between them and pay whatever that management costs in trust and credibility and locker room alignment. Myles Garrett has been in Cleveland long enough to have earned the right to be done with managed ambiguity. He broke his silence because he decided, after everything he has invested in this franchise and everything he has watched this franchise put him through, that staying diplomatically quiet was something he could no longer honestly justify. He looked at all of the evidence around him, and he said what the evidence told him to say, directly and without apology. The organization has to decide now whether it is going to honor that kind of earned honesty with the seriousness it deserves, or whether it is going to manage past it and live with everything that choice costs. I know which direction the evidence points. Garrett knows, and when you strip away every layer of organizational positioning and diplomatic language and carefully manage public communication, I think everyone inside that building in Cleveland knows it too. The question was never really about the football decision. The question is about whether this franchise has the clarity and the conviction to make the call that all of its own evidence has been demanding for weeks. That is what Myles Garrett put on the table. That is what Cleveland now has to answer.